Magic's newest mascot just got its coolest card yet, and it seems like a very fun Temur commander. That's Loot the Pathfinder. And not only is this card just cool, good value, it's a combo card too. This thing is powerful. Each of its abilities can only be used once. So that's a big downside, but it can tap for 3 mana, deal 3 damage, or draw you 3 cards. It can Black Lotus, it can Ancestral Recall, and it can Lightning Bolt. That's fantastic, this card's strong. But the once per turn thing, you have some ways to get around, like blinking. Blinking is a way that you can reset Loot, and since Loot has haste, you can immediately tap him and start using those abilities all over again. We're going to be talking about ways that you can abuse that, but also let's start off with that combo that I mentioned. To be able to combo off with Loot, you need a way around his once per turn clause. And you also kind of need infinite mana. And so the best way to do that is a tried and true combo of Peregrine Drake and Deadeye Navigator. Both of these cards together let you use Deadeye Navigator to blink Peregrine Drake re-enters, untaps all your lands, and you do that over and over and over, tapping for an additional 3 mana every single time to generate infinite mana. And then once you have your infinite mana, you then shift the Soul Bond to Loot. You blink Deadeye, it re-enters, you Soul Bond it to Loot. You now have infinite mana and Loot Soul Bonded. You can now activate Loot to deal 3 damage to any target, and then use some of your infinite mana to blink Loot and do that again and again and again and win the game. You can also use a similar combo with Food Chain and Mist Hollow Griffin, another way to make infinite mana, and you're able to get around that Loot once per turn issue by sacrificing Loot after you activate him every time to the Food Chain, and then you just cast it from the command zone again and then redo it over and over and over again. So those are 2 different ways that you can just go infinite with Loot to win the game. And if for some reason you can't deal 3 damage to everybody to kill them because somebody has hexproof or something like that, you can draw your whole deck and win that way. Being able to reset Loot so you can activate those abilities again and again and again is really, really important for this deck. So let's talk about ways that you can reset him by blinking him. You have some reputable ways like Conjurer's Closet, Displacer Kitten, which I'm sure has a way to just kind of go infinite with Loot. Maybe not a deterministic infinite, but I'm sure that it can just generate an insane amount of value in this deck. Meneldor, Swift Savior, and Thassa, Deep Dwelling. You also have your one-shot blinks like Blur, Displace, Essence Flux, which could be really good under an Isochron Scepter, Ghostly Flicker, Planar Incision, and Teferi's Time Twist. You can also get around that exhaust downside via cloning Loot, so that way you can just kind of make more Loots and dig through your deck to get to those consistent ways to blink Loot, so that way you can do it over and over again. You have cards like Helm of the Host, which just makes you a new Loot every turn, so you have all 3 abilities available again, every single turn. Irenicus's Vile Duplication, Marvin Murderous Mimic, love Marvin in here, Quantum Misalignment, Sakashima, you got 2 different Sakashimas that work great, Sean, Father of Synths, and Spark Double. If you have a Conjurer's Closet in play and you've got Loot in play, you're going to want to be able to utilize all 3 of his abilities every turn, so that way at the end step you can blink him and then reset him, so then you can do that all again the next turn. There are some good ways to go about doing that. There's a lot of ways to untap Loot. This is a big section that we're going to talk about here because it's an important section, but let's go through all the different ways that you can use Loot more than once a turn. There's Apeto Alchemist, Awakening, which is a pretty interesting one here, Cerulean Wisps, Chakram Retriever, Cursive Bounty, Elmar, which also gets you clues, Freed from the Real, Intruder Alarm, which is fantastic with all of these blink things, Lorith, Kelpie Guide, Kiora's Follower, Kiora Behemoth Beckoner. A lot of those are also ways to generate additional mana, so they fit into your ramp package, which is really nice. Legolas's Quick Reflexes, it's a good way to turn Loot into a big removal spell while also protecting Loot. Magerite Stone, Maze of Ith, which works really well with Loot because Loot has Vigilance. You can go to combat, swing with Loot, and during combat, activate one of his abilities, and then use Maze of Ith to untap him and remove him from combat. You can even do that after he's done damage, so you can get in with loot and then untap him and remove him from combat, and boom, you can activate him again. Minamo School at Water's Edge, Petrier's Seal, nice little ramp piece too, Pemin's Aura, Puppet Strings, Quest for Renewal, Quirion Ranger, which I really like in this. Raga Draga also works because of the Vigilance. You go to combat, you swing with loot, Raga Draga triggers because loot does have a mana ability on it, and in response to the trigger, you tap loot to activate something, and then you untap loot. It even buffs loot, which is nice. Retreat to Coral Helm, Sereth the Viper's Fang, which also protects loot. Scrib Ranger, similar to Quirion Ranger. Seedborn Muse, fantastic in here. Sting Glinting Dagger. Thousand Year Elixir, and Vizier of Tumbling Sands. There's a few cards in particular I wanted to mention that don't fit in any of those categories, and those include Adric, which lets you copy one of Loot's abilities, so why not draw 6 cards? Agatha's Soul Cauldron is an interesting one with Loot, because if you're able to exile Loot under it and have Agatha's Soul Cauldron kind of be your hidden commander, all of your creatures can gain Loot abilities, and that seems insane. It's a much riskier game plan, but it's pretty interesting. Battle Mage's Bracers and Illusionist Bracers to additionally copy that ability. Gandalf the Grey, it just kind of works well in the deck because it's got a similar restriction to Loot, where it can only use each ability once, but if it gets blinked and reset, then you can go through those abilities once again. So it just fits the shell really well, and it has some powerful abilities. On the trail, you're going to be drawing tons of cards thanks to Loot's Draw 3 ability, so you might as well throw this in so you can get some extra ramp going. And lastly, I want to mention a few cards that just kind of make those abilities of Loot even better, like cards that buff his abilities a little more. You have Gorgon's Flail and Basilisk Collar to give him Death Touch, so that way the deal 3 damage to any target can just kill anything. Orin Frostfang works in a similar way, but also draws you cards. And since Loot has Double Strike, if he gets in, he draws you 2 cards. And lastly, Leyline of Abundance. Make it so his mana ability taps for an additional mana. Seems very good. That is everything I have for Loot the Pathfinder. Let me know if you're going to build Loot and if I was able to help you out. I'll see you next time. Peace out, everybody.